Hello and welcome to The Wander with Andrew Wilcox. Today on the show I've got Gabe Brown. It's going to be kind of a continuation on the topic that we talked about last week when it comes to regenerative farming, and this guy is a legend in it. He is an author, he is a farmer, he is a rancher, he is a public speaker, he is an educator. He's a really cool dude, really down-to-earth man. And he was an absolute pleasure to talk with about this regenerative agriculture and getting back to the soil. I really wanted to talk to him about soil because I learned a bunch and I thought it was pretty incredible. So I hope that you enjoy the podcast. And if you are liking the podcast, this is the point where I gotta ask you, you don't have to pay anything, but could you like us on Facebook, on YouTube, be a subscriber? That way you'll get every episode. Subscribe to us on wherever we are, man. iTunes, Spotify, Google, we're on all of them. Subscribe to us there and leave a review. If you want to leave a review, I would dig that. I really would appreciate that, especially if it's a good review. In fact, I don't think I can ask this, but if you could just leave good reviews, that would be great. Anyway, that's my little request, if you can. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. It's so fun to be doing new episodes again. You can check out all the episodes at thewanderpodcast.com. And you can reach out to me, of course, at Andrew at thewanderpodcast.com. Yeah. So anyway, let's get to the episode. Gabe was an absolute pleasure to talk to. Super awesome guy. And let's talk soil, man. Let's talk soil. Hey, Gabe, thanks for joining me here today. I really wanted to have a conversation with you because I think people don't think about soil, but you've been essentially a soil crusader for like 30 years now. Can you give us a little bit of your story?
So try and keep this brief. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you today. I grew up in the city of Bismarck, but I took a real interest in farming and ranching. Actually planned on going to college to become a vocational agriculture instructor. Happened to marry my high school sweetheart, and she has two sisters, no brothers. And so her parents wanted to know if we would be interested in farming. So upon graduation from college, we moved back onto their ranch, which is where we are today, right outside of Bismarck, North Dakota. My wife and I purchased part of the ranch from them in 1991. And to make a long story short, because I didn't grow up on a farmer ranch, I was always wanting to learn more about it. So I'd studied about no-till, learned the benefits of that, went 100% no-till, 1994. Then I had a series of 4 years in a row. We lost our crops to either hail or drought. 4 years in a row, no crop income. Bank wasn't going to loan me money anymore. I had to figure out, how am I going to make this ranch productive without all these added inputs? Because I couldn't borrow the money for fertilizer and all the other inputs. That sent me on a learning journey, which continues to this day. And I learned over time that there's 6 principles that are constant no matter where you go in the world where there's soil-based agriculture. And I learned that if we focus on the soil, the land becomes very productive, the ecosystem becomes healthier, the food becomes higher in nutrient density, and it's more or less became my life's mission to educate others.
Well, that's beautiful. And I think one thing that I saw you mention in another presentation I watched that you had done, you can also increase profit and help the climate by having the soil be better.
That's exactly right. So what this has evolved into for myself is that our son is now running the ranch, and I spend my time educating others and consulting on farms and ranches around the world. We are now consulting on nearly 30 million acres in North America and in the UK. And we show others that if you apply these principles and focus on the natural cycles, you're able to significantly decrease your inputs. By that, I mean fertilizers and pesticides and fungicides and all these other things that really use fossil fuels, but don't really benefit us in the terms of ecosystem function. And farming and ranching over eons of time has degraded the resource to where now we have massive amounts of carbon in the atmosphere, not nearly as much in the soils. But by focusing on these time-tested ecological principles, we can take massive amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back into the soil where it drives all of these functions and the mineral cycle and the water cycle and all the things that can benefit us as humans.
Yeah, one of the things I watched you say, and I really loved it, was I want to sign the back of the check, not the front of it.
Well, I tell people one of the benefits I had is that I was about as close to going broke as one could get. And you really learn during that time that much of what we think is necessary really isn't. And I became really averse to writing checks. Mm-hmm. And yet I enjoyed signing the back of the check whenever I made money. So I've kind of stuck with that mantra.
And you said there was 6 principles for getting into this. What are those 6 principles?
Yeah. So the 6 principles of soil health are briefly. Number 1 is context. You have to farm or ranch within your context. So often when I work with producers today, they're trying to grow a crop, for instance, that's not suited to their environment. Mm-hmm. They're calving in the middle of winter in an environment where they shouldn't be calving at that time of the year. So you have to take your context into account. The second principle is least amount of mechanical, chemical disturbance possible. Look at what we do in agriculture today. We do heavy tillage with plowing and we disturb that soil. Well, what that does then is that's negative towards water infiltration, negative towards soil biology. It's more prone to wind erosion, water erosion, evaporation, et cetera. And in agriculture today, we're using copious amounts of all these synthetic inputs, whether it be fertilizers, herbicides, fungicides. That's just not conducive to a healthy functioning ecosystem. Mm-hmm. The third principle is armor on the soil. Nature always tries to cover the soil. It always tries to put a living plant there to cover the soil. We don't want to see bare soil. So as farmers and ranchers, we need to not only grow our cash crops, but we need to ensure that there's a living plant at all time and that soil is protected. The fourth principle is that of diversity. Where in nature do you find monocultures? Usually only where mankind's action has put them or caused them to be. Nature thrives on diversity of plant species, animals, and insects. The fifth principle is living root in the soil as long as possible throughout the year. Nature always wants a living plant, and it's that living plant that takes in CO2 out of the atmosphere, photosynthesis occurs, and then it translocates part of those carbon compounds down to the roots into the soil to feed biology. That sequesters carbon. That's the reason we need to have more of these principles in place so we can mitigate climate change. And the final principle is animal and insect integration. Ecosystems do not function properly without animals and insects. Look how the vast areas of grasslands were formed. They were formed with grazing animals being moved by predators, taking a bite off a plant, and then they had trample the rest and defecate and urinate, and that would fertilize the soil. Now what do? We put the animals in confinement, we put them in feedlots, and that's just not conducive to healthy soil ecosystems. So I have the good fortune, I get to travel all over the world every year, and I tell people I have never, ever been on a single farm or ranch, including my own, that's not degraded. We're all farming and ranching degraded ecosystems. However, by focusing on these principles in your context, you can significantly advance and restore ecosystem function, which will not only put more dollars in your pocket as a farmer or rancher, but it will make significant positive contributions to the environment.
So a couple of things you mentioned there seem to go definitely the exact opposite from a lot of what we do right now. What kind of resistance do you get from these ideas?
Realize I've been going down this path for a long time, and I've been a big target for a lot of people, and I have a lot of stones thrown at me, and it just doesn't bother me.
Yeah.
Because I'm working with time-tested ecological principles that nobody can deny. Everything I talk about is fact. They want to cast stones at it and say it's not true, but it is. And any scientist worth their salt will tell you that. And so I get resistance in that farmers and ranchers say, well, I can't do that because I have to focus on yield in pounds. But what we're able to show them is, and I'll use this as an example. Just here a few weeks ago, I was speaking at a large conference, and the speakers all before me were focused on how do you apply more to increase your yields. And so I stood up and I said, okay, how many of you are here today to learn how to increase your yields? And just about everybody raised their hand. And I said, well, you're not going to hurt my feelings if you get up and leave, because I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about something more novel. I'm going to talk about how do you increase your profits. And boy, they laughed, and snickered. And then I got their attention, because I tell them I will take profit over yield in pounds any day, because I can stay in business if I make a profit. Just because I get a high yield doesn't mean that it's profitable. And so we have to change the mindset. The resistance I see comes about from mainly a lack of education, lack of understanding. There's no one else really out there touting these principles. You go to any government agency, go to land grant universities, go to the farm publications. They're not talking about how principles drive the processes and improve profitability, because that doesn't make them any money. They're not selling anything there. And so it's a lack of understanding. Once we educate producers, the success is quite high. And they realize that, boy, this does work. Our firm, Understanding Ag, was founded just over 4 years ago. And we went from 0 acres consulting to nearly 30 million in 4 years. That's a pretty drastic increase. But that shows you that farmers and ranchers are wanting something different. They know that the current production model isn't working. They see it and they want change.
How one of them in there is insect life. And it always seems like a big thing about agriculture has always been, we've got to get rid of the insects. We got to get rid of the insects. We got to get rid of those. That must be one that is touched on in quite a bit.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, this morning I was just on a Zoom meeting with one of the world's foremost entomologists, Dr. Jonathan Lundgren. And I met Dr. Lundgren in 2012, and he helped open my eyes as to the importance of insects. And he made a statement at that time that I'll never forget. He said, for every insect species that's a pest, there's 1,700 that are beneficial. So as farmers, we spend all our time trying to kill that pest. Why not spend our time providing a home and habitat for the beneficials, and they in turn will consume that pest? And I can honestly say, since I've started focusing on that, providing home and habitat for those beneficials, I have never had pest insects reach an economically damaging level on my ranch. And that just shows you nature is always self-organizing, self-healing, self-regulating. Nature will come into balance if we allow her to.
And nature's been doing it for quite a while. It knows what it's doing.
That's right.
One other thing in there was diversity. And you were talking about diversity of plants. on the farm, animals on the farm and stuff like that. But also, does that not lend to the farmer a bit of diversity when it comes to economics? Because if you're into one crop and that crop goes, what do you do? But when you've got diversity,
that's exactly right. We deal a lot, obviously, in the corn and soybean belt, and farmers there tend to think they can only grow corn and soybeans. Well, I often get asked when I go speak, we focus on corn and soybeans. Well, is that the most profitable? Let me give you the statistics. In 2020, the average profit per acre of corn in the United States was $10 per acre. Okay. So as a farmer, is it wise for you to put all your capital at risk for a mere $10 per acre profit? Meanwhile, I grow crops that I can net from $400 on up to nearly $1,000 per acre. Oh. Now, they're not commonly grown crops, but why do I want to grow something that everybody else is? It's supply and demand. And so as you have diversity, you're going to build your resiliency. On our ranch, for example, we still grow corn. We don't grow soybeans, but we grow corn and spring wheat and peas and oats and barley and triticale and rye and hairy vetch and a myriad of other crops. Some years we have more of a certain kind than others, but that leaves us very flexible. For instance, the past 2 years were the two driest years ever recorded here on our ranch. Well, I wasn't going to plant corn. Corn needs a lot of moisture. Instead, I went to lower water use crops such as barley and millet, and I still had profitable crops despite the driest year ever on record. So diversity builds resiliency, and it ensures economic stability on the farm and ranch.
I did see that you had spoken to Congress a bit about some of these issues. How did that go?
Yeah, so that was last February. I was asked to testify in front of the House Agriculture Committees. They had a hearing on agriculture's role in climate change. And so everyone there was testifying that, agriculture needs to be the beneficiary of monies allocated to help understand how climate change affects agriculture. And I'm like, no, agriculture is part of the solution to climate change. Yes, agriculture was part of the problem in that due to farming practices, we have put more carbon in the atmosphere than should be there. However, if we change and go back to a regenerative type agriculture, we can take massive amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere and put it back into the soil. What frustrated me so much about that testimony is you have one side of the aisle screaming that climate change is the problem and farmers need to hone up to it. You have the other side of the aisle saying, no, everything we're doing in agriculture is honky-dory and it's just fine. And yet that same side of the aisle is saying farm and ranch profitability is a real crisis. Well, I'm thinking to myself, you both sides want the same thing. Why can't you come together and find common ground for common good? Let's focus on the things that we can agree on and work together for the betterment of society instead of arguing like kids in a schoolyard, which is basically what they do in Washington, if I may say, quite frankly.
Well, it's become a massive problem in our culture, not just in America, but in Canada as well, where we're very much divided along very particular lines. And that's what I liked about when I saw your stuff was like, you strike me as a person that's very pragmatic about this solution. You see it as potentially helping all of these issues and being financially viable without it being some sort of we've got to stop doing this because it's bad for the environment. No, we've got to look for solutions that are going to feed everybody and keep our world healthy. But we don't have, I don't think, enough people thinking that way. I think we have a lot of incredible individuals working as farmers today that love what they do and want to make a better product that is, feeding society and helping society. And the solutions are not found in those two sides, in my mind. So, and that's why I wanted to speak to you, because I think a lot of what you're saying helps to solve a lot of those issues.
So we have a saying, as I just mentioned, at Understanding Ag, let's come together on common ground for common good. And what we focus on is we're going to talk to both sides of the aisle, both sides of the fence, whatever acronym you want to give it, it doesn't matter. What we believe is that you have to approach people where they're at. So we will have people coming to us every week who are concerned about water quality issues. Regenerative agriculture has the ability to address that. We can hold more nutrients on the landscape instead of seeing them enter our watersheds. Is your focus on climate change? Regenerative agriculture can certainly address that, because we can help take massive amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere and return it to the soil. Is your focus on human health? Regenerative agriculture can certainly address that. We're working on a number of key projects that are measuring nutrient density. In other words, these phytochemical nutrients in food, and the ability of plants that are grown in healthy soil, regenerated soil, will produce much higher quantities and a much more diverse array of these phytochemicals. And the list could go on, but if you're concerned about farm profitability, Dr. Lundgren did excellent work that showed that regenerative farms are 76% higher in profitability as compared to conventional farms. 76%.
Wow.
That's huge. So you look at the mental health, and farming and ranching, unfortunately, some of the highest suicide rates of any occupation in the world. Regenerative ag, the one thing we hear over and over is it makes farming and ranching fun again. Why is that? It's more profitable. That eases the stress on farmers and their spouses, and whatever crisis is out there, and wherever your context is, regenerative agriculture, at least in part, can address those things.
Yeah, and one of those I was thinking about was quality of life for the animal as well.
Oh, yeah. So one of the things, and for instance, on our ranch, we have a herd of cows, we raise grass-finished beef, we got a flock of sheep, we raise grass-finished lamb, we have 1,400 laying hens out on pasture during the summer. In the winter, they're in a hoop house. We have hogs, and we farrow hogs and pasture our pork. We have broiler chickens, we have bees. And one of the things that makes our farm a little unique is we have an open door policy. Anybody can drive on our farm at any time and look at anything. We're not trying to hide anything. We're proud of the way we take care of our animals. And we have more than just a few animals. At any given time, we have 600 to 800 beef animals and several hundred sheep and several hundred hogs and thousands of chickens. And so there's a lot to see here. But the one thing they will notice is the animals seem content and they seem happy. They have ample feed in front of them. They're very calm, docile, easy to be around. That's quality of life for the animals too. And we always tell people our animals have one great life and then one bad moment, but they don't know that bad moment is coming. Mm-hmm. And we should all be so lucky, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up on a small beef ranch just outside of my hometown, and definitely quality of life was something that we always focused on. But and you definitely see the difference between that and industrialized farming. One thing you mentioned in when you were doing the talk was your son got more time on the recliner because the animals were allowed to feed themselves.
Yeah,
and had grazing land.
Yeah, we move our animals every day, so they get, it's kind of like turning ourselves into a fresh buffet every day, but it's all the other things we don't do that allows us to have the quality of life. We don't have to go get fertilizer and apply chemicals, and we don't give the cattle all these vaccines and shots and wormers and all these things that so many do. The greatest recipe for health is to be able to use food as preventative medicine. So whether that be us in the food we consume or the diversity of that an animal consumes, that ensures their health. And if they're healthy, you just don't have to treat them. They're not sick. That's animal welfare too, in my books.
Well, and that, as you just mentioned as well, is huge for human welfare as well. If we are eating better, if we're eating better foods, better grown foods, more diverse foods, we're going to have less issues as well. You'd mentioned, I'd heard you mention about how the health in the States was so low, even though you guys spend so much on healthcare. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
I sure can. So I often explain to people, United States spends more on healthcare per capita than any other country in the world. Yet when you look at incidences of disease, we're at the top or near the top. ADD, ADHD, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, autoimmune diseases, cancer, osteoporosis, and the list goes on. And now, are farmers and ranchers to blame for all that? No, sedentary lifestyle, other things come into play. But certainly, when you look at the research, the nutrient density of our foods has declined drastically over the past 70 years. A person today would have to consume twice as much meat, 3 times as much fruit, 4 times as many vegetables to get the same phytochemical nutrients as they would have eaten the same amount back in 1940. That's a huge difference. Wow. And we're working with Dr. Stefan Van Vliet, who's at Utah State University, Dr. Fred Provenza, also at Utah State, Dr. Scott Kronberg here in North Dakota. And we're involved in a number of projects where they will actually come out on the farms and ranches. They will test the different plants that are growing. They will watch what the animals consume. And then they will take fecal urine samples from those animals. And then when those animals are harvested or when they produce eggs or milk, they will test those products for these phytonutrient compounds. And what they're finding, we're also doing the same things on conventional farms and ranches. We're finding that the phytonutrients, a much wider array and a much greater quantity in those products that are grown and raised in our unhealthy soils. So human health is directly related to the health of the soil and what we put in our mouths. So it's our belief that we need to get society back to this, back to the point that food is truly used as preventative medicine. And that's how it should be. So we're working with members of the medical community to get this data out there and show them that, hey, it does matter where you source your food and then what you consume.
How do we make better food more affordable and more accessible to everybody?
Mm-hmm. So you ask a couple different questions there. And one of the things that's really lacking is there is no verification program out there right now that adequately takes into account where that food is grown and raised and the ecosystem it is. That is up until now, okay? So my partners and I at Understanding Ag are announcing that we are starting a verification program. And the goal with that is we're going to be able to take producers where they're at. So any conventional producer can sign up. Anybody such as myself who is well along this path can sign up. We come out, we do baseline work to quantify. Are you adopting the 6 principles to drive the processes? And then we come back a year later and test and check if you are. Now, those who have been going down this path for some time, they can get verified immediately. But part of this, and here's the important part, you have to have a plan to continue to advance your ecosystem. Doesn't matter what your neighbor's doing. What are you doing? And our goal for doing this is to drive regenerative practices on as many acres as is possible around the world. But you will then, once you're verified, the products that you grow or raise on your farm or ranch will be able to have that verification. And then in turn, the stores and the food companies will be able to offer that in their supply chain. And what we're finding is tremendous support. We have a number of companies that are signing on already, and they want to move their supply chain down this regenerative path because they know, most companies have a quote unquote sustainability plan and how are they going to be carbon neutral, et cetera, et cetera. Well, this is the way to bring everyone forward and move this. So that will be coming out. Obviously, it's going to take some time to get it to a large enough scale. However, I tell you, the companies that we're working with, they're not small companies. So this will be available on a large scale in the near future. Now, you asked about how do we get food affordable? One of the things I think is we really start to have to think of food as health. Okay. So it's not just the price of the food. We got to tie what's the cost to society and healthcare in the pollution that's in our watersheds, in our drinking water, et cetera, the harm we're doing to the environment. That all has a cost. But as more and more producers adopt these practices, their costs will be lower and lower, and they're able to produce food at a much lower cost. I will use, my own ranch as an example. I can produce beef or lamb or pork for a fraction of the cost of the average producer. Now, do I sell it for a fraction of the cost? No, because it's supply and demand. And I want to make a reasonable profit. Okay. However, as more and more people go down this path, we will see where that price premium will subside and it will lower prices across the board.
You're going to be so good at your job, you're going to hurt your job.
That's all right. I've done all right. I'm not hurting at all.
No, that's good. So if somebody wants, like when you speak to ranchers and farmers and they want to start this process, how long does this process take?
Yeah, that's a good question. And when we have a new client, which is pretty much on a daily basis, come to Understanding Ag, we tell them, okay, you have to be committed. You have to educate yourself. And we have educational materials available because our consultant has to be able to talk the same language as them, so to speak. Next, our consultant comes out to that farm or ranch, does an assessment, and then develops a plan. What we tell our clients is you have to commit one field for 5 years. Okay. And you've got to follow our plan and go down it. We have had a couple of people drop out after a year or two. They just don't, their aversion to risk just isn't there, and they think it's too risky. By and large, what happens? By year 3, they're totally bought in, and they are converting their whole farm to regenerative. We have never had anybody get in it 4 or 5 years and go back to what they were doing, because they see the increase in profit. They see the difference it's making to their soils, see the difference it's making, in their family's attitude and lives. And they just want to go into it full tilt.
And you have a book as well called Dirt to Soil, One Family's Journey into Regenerative Agriculture. What inspired you to write the book?
Yeah, so I'd been asked for a number of years by several different publishers to write a book, and I just had no desire to do so. My life was busy enough. And then Chelsea Green approached me and said, Gabe, would you consider doing it with a ghostwriter? And I said, okay, I would maybe consider that, having an accomplished author, help me with it. Well, as it ended up, I ended up writing that book myself in about a 6-week time frame. And with Chelsea Green's help, and it was Amazon's #1 selling agricultural book for 28 months in a row. So I'm pretty proud of that fact.
Yeah, that's great. Was there any part of the book that was tough to write?
A little bit about family was tough. Actually, one of the toughest was I wrote a chapter about financial aspects and how at the end of those 4 years, my family and I were $1.5 million in debt, and no way out of it, it seemed, but how we were able to dig ourselves out of that hole. And unfortunately, that got left on the cutting room floor, but that was probably the hardest chapter to write, because it's not easy to open up about your finances.
Yeah, that's always tough to put out there, but you got out of it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I think that's an inspiring tale, because I know a lot of farmers and ranchers are in a tough financial space. You must believe that it's possible to switch to regenerative agriculture even when you're in a tough spot, and it can help to get you out of that, because it worked for you, right?
Yeah, it did. In saying that, obviously our goal is to move people down this path before they were in as tough a situation as I was in. And fortunately today, we're seeing a lot of people do that. Unfortunately, there are people who come to us who it's just too late. They may have to sell some land or start over. However, the consultants that we work with are very good at taking people where they're at, finding the low-hanging fruit, so to speak. How can we start generating a profit as quickly as possible to dig themselves out of the hole they're in? And the vast majority of times, 95 times out of 100, we're able to do that. Now, that might mean shedding some equipment, shedding some land, doing what you have to do to save the farm. But in the long run, they're going to be better off. And fortunately, when one goes down the regenerative path, it doesn't normally take too long. Certainly by the end of year 2, you're significantly increasing profits. Now, I want to hedge that by saying the ability of one to go down the regenerative path is directly related to one's understanding of how these principles drive the processes. And oftentimes we'll hear from people who, they think they're going down the path, but they can't figure out why they're just not making headway. Well, when we go there and start working with them, they're not applying the principles fully. And that's what's holding them up. They might say, well, yeah, I was no-till for 2 years, but then I had to till because we had a couple wet years. And yeah, you're just setting the clock back to zero again. You can't do that, So oftentimes when I'm out speaking, I'll tell people that their farm, their ranch is a direct reflection of them. If they don't like what they're seeing, they need to go look in the mirror, because it's a direct result of their actions. Every single thing we do on a farm or ranch has either positive compounding effect or negative cascading effects. It's either positive or negative, never neutral. Are you going to go apply that fertilizer? Are you going to spray that herbicide? Are you going to move those livestock daily? All those things matter. And you need to understand and be educated as to how that either positively or negatively affects your operation.
And does regenerative agriculture, does that change how you sell your product?
That's a very good question, and it can. It can. What we're seeing is that people, as they go down this path, and we always say regenerative agriculture is a journey, it's not a destination.
Mm-hmm.
You're always learning, and who knows what's around the next bend. And so what we see is as people get in this and they're seeing that they're producing higher quality grains, higher quality pastured proteins, they'll want to take advantage of that and capture more dollars. So oftentimes that leads to an association with a company that wants to buy products that are grown and raised in this manner, or they go into direct marketing it themselves. And we have many of our clients who do that. That's up to them. It doesn't have to mean that you have to sell direct market everything yourself, but it's the opportunity for more money in your pocket if you do.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was thinking is, I mean, if you're making a higher quality product, you're not going to be wanting to put it into the same places as everyone else's. But then you're going to have to learn those marketing skills. And sometimes that can be a big step. But I think there's also a misunderstanding of, what it's like to be a farmer and a rancher in these times. You have to be very good at understanding your yields, understanding the processes that are happening on your farm and all of that stuff. It's not a simple thing. But you also might have to be a little bit more diverse when it comes to being able to market yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's a skill.
But that's up to each individual. And we work with clients who they have no desire to direct market. And we tell them, that's fine, but you're raising a real high quality product, growing a high quality product. Let's at least explore the possibility of you capturing a premium for that. Yeah. And oftentimes that's what they do. They might not be marketers themselves, but they can align with somebody who is a good marketer.
Yeah, there's opportunities. There's opportunities in this type of agriculture for people other than farmers and ranchers. Would you agree with
absolutely. That? Absolutely. Yep. There's many ways to be involved in regenerative agriculture.
So one film that I saw that I quite liked was what's it called? Biggest Little Farm? The Biggest Little Farm. Yeah, that's a great one about regenerative agriculture. And also Kiss the Ground, which was one that you were involved in. What was that process like?
Yeah, and realize Kiss the Ground was actually filmed about 8 years ago. It literally took 7 years from when we first started working with them until that film was released. It was a good experience. The message changed. It originally was to be a message on organic food. And then Ray Archuleta and myself and others convinced Josh and Rebecca, the producers, that no, it's about soil health and ecosystem health. And so the film went and changed courses a few times. I was pleased with how it ended up. In saying that, I will tell you a sequel is being filmed.
Oh, cool.
As we speak. We started filming it past June, and this film is going to be called Common Ground. And it is Josh and Rebecca Tegal are producing it also. But this is going to be about regenerative agriculture.
Nice.
And just what I described for you today. Many of those in the film will be clients of Understanding Ag, and they will be people who have gone on their own journey down the regenerative path for one reason or another, whether it be human health, whether it be financial strain, whether it be just those wanting to change. And it's going to be a story about how we can come together as a society and how we need to come together for to address these issues that are facing us.
Well, that's great. That's exciting. I'm really excited for that.
Yeah. We're hoping to have it out in about a little over a year.
Nice.
Mhm.
Well, you have to let me know because maybe we can talk again then. And we're coming close to around our time here. Usually when I wrap up a show, I ask what's something that you think people should read, watch, and listen. Is there anything that you would recommend people read?
Yeah, reading the book Nourishment by Dr. Fred Provenza. It has in there the importance of knowing where your food comes from and just how far we've gotten away from truly nutrient dense food. Often when I go out and speak, I tell people, I firmly believe 95% of the people on this planet have never tasted nutrient dense food. Because once they do, their body will tell them, hey, that was good. I want some more of it,
Yeah.
And I contend we no longer eat food. We eat food like substances, Look at labels today. You don't recognize 95% of what's on that label. So the book Nourishment is one I would strongly recommend. There's a new one coming out by Dr. David Montgomery. It'll be out in a couple short months. What Your Food Ate. And that has some really good information in it as to the differences in food and how it's grown and raised.
Cool. What about watch?
What to watch? I encourage producers to, and I'm not going to pinpoint a specific podcast or YouTube video, but just spend some time educating themselves as to regenerative agriculture. And even consumers need to be aware of this because I'm often asked, okay, I'm a consumer. How can I make a difference? Well, consumers can make all the difference because they vote with their buying dollar every day. And if consumers would start demanding food that's grown and raised in a regenerative manner, they could help to heal this planet and to change the food system. So I encourage them to educate themselves as to what is regenerative agriculture.
And if the demand goes up, the price will go down.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And most importantly, food will be preventative medicine then.
And something that people should listen to.
Yeah. So, well, I'd obviously have to say they should listen to my book, Dirt to Soil, since I narrated it on Audible.
Nice.
But boy, you caught me off guard. What they should listen to. There's a number of good books on human health and the importance of consuming a diet that not only is good for your body, but is good for the ecosystem.
Perfect. Well, Gabe, thank you very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. It's been great to talk to you. Is there anything you want to leave everybody with?
Well, I would just leave everybody and challenge everyone to make a difference. Make a difference in your own society. Educate yourself. Talk about it. Go to local farmers markets. Get to know your farmers. I'm a firm believer in buying food locally. Support those people who are supporting your community.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Gabe. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure being with you.